My cold billionaire husband never loved me, but one forbidden kiss turned our world upside down. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. 14 months, 3 weeks, 5 days. Savannah Cole counted time differently now, not in calendar pages or seasons changing, but in the accumulation of small rejections, tiny moments of invisibility that had slowly drained the life from her soul. She stood at the massive windows of the Manhattan penthouse, watching couples walk hand in hand through Central Park below, their laughter floating up like a cruel reminder of everything her marriage wasn't. At 42, she had thought she understood loneliness. Her divorce from Marcus had been brutal, leaving her financially devastated and emotionally scarred. But that pain had been sharp, honest, nothing like the slow suffocation of living with someone who treated her like an expensive piece of furniture. The Peterson contract needs to be finalized by noon. Damien's voice cut through the morning air, cold and businesslike as always. Savannah didn't turn around. She knew what she would see. Her husband of 14 months standing in his perfectly pressed Armani suit, already checking his phone, treating their shared space like a hotel lobby where they happened to cross paths. "Of course," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I'll handle the social aspects." It was always like this. Business, arrangements, logistics. Never good morning, beautiful, or how did you sleep? Or any of the 1,000 small intimacies that made a marriage feel alive. Just the cold efficiency of two people managing a corporation that happened to share their last name. The marriage contract had been explicit. No emotional involvement, no physical intimacy, no pretense of love. She had signed those papers thinking she could live with emptiness if it meant security. For herself, for her sick mother, for the family home that would have been lost without Damien's money. But 14 months of this hollow existence had taught her the difference between surviving and living, and she was tired of merely surviving. "I'll be in Boston until Wednesday," Damien continued, his tone suggesting he was reading from a schedule rather than talking to his wife. "The charity gala is Thursday. Morrison will brief you on the guest list." "Morrison will brief you. Not, I'd like you there with me, or we should discuss this together." Just another item on his assistant's to-do list, filed somewhere between dry cleaning pickup and board meeting preparations. Savannah finally turned to face him, studying the man who was legally her husband, but might as well have been a stranger. Damien Whitlock was undeniably handsome, 44 years old, with sharp cheekbones, steel blue eyes, and silver threading through his dark hair that only made him more distinguished. But his beauty was untouchable, like admiring a sculpture in a museum. You could look, but you could never truly connect. "Will you be staying at the usual hotel?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He always stayed at the Four Seasons when he traveled, always ordered room service instead of eating with clients, always worked until midnight and flew back the next morning without calling her once. "Yes," he replied, finally glancing up from his phone. For a moment, their eyes met, and Savannah felt that familiar flutter of hope. Maybe this time he would see her, really see her, as more than just a contractual obligation. But his gaze was already moving past her, back to his screen, back to the work that consumed every moment of his life. "I should go," he said, gathering his briefcase. "Traffic will be heavy." As he walked toward the door, Savannah felt the words building in her chest like steam in a pressure cooker. All the things she wanted to say, all the emotions she had carefully buried for over a year, threatening to explode into the sterile air between them. "Damien!" she called out, her voice sharper than she intended. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Yes? Look at me," she wanted to scream. "See me, touch me, ask me how I'm feeling or what I dreamed about last night or whether I'm happy. Treat me like I'm a woman, not a business asset." But when she opened her mouth, all that came out was, "Have a safe flight." He nodded once, polite, distant, professionally courteous, and was gone. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Savannah sank onto the Italian leather sofa that cost more than most people's cars, pulling her silk robe tighter around her body as if it could somehow keep her from falling apart. 14 months of this. 14 months of sharing a home with someone who barely acknowledged her existence outside of the social functions where she was required to smile and play the role of the perfect billionaire's wife. 14 months of going to bed alone while he worked late in his study, of eating breakfast in a kitchen filled with everything except warmth, of standing at windows like this one and feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Nina. "Coffee today. You sound like you need it." Savannah stared at the message, wondering what Nina would say if she knew the truth, that the fairy tale marriage everyone envied was actually a beautifully decorated prison, that the man who had saved her family from financial ruin had slowly, methodically killed something essential inside her, that she was disappearing a little more each day, becoming smaller and quieter and more invisible, until soon there might be nothing left of the woman she used to be. She thought about her life before the marriage, the modest apartment in Brooklyn, the struggle to make ends meet, the constant worry about her mother's medical bills, that life had been hard, frightening even, but it had been hers. She had made her own choices, felt her own emotions, harbored her own dreams. She had been broke, but she had been alive. Now she had everything money could buy and nothing her heart actually wanted. The penthouse around her was a monument to wealth and taste. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. But it felt like a mausoleum, beautiful and cold and utterly lifeless. She picked up her phone and typed back to Nina, "Yes, I need to get out of here." As she headed to her bedroom to get dressed, Savannah caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at her was impeccably groomed, expensively dressed, the picture of upper-class perfection. But her eyes were empty, hollow, with the kind of loneliness that comes from being unseen by the one person whose attention matters most. At 42, she was living in a fairy tale that felt like a nightmare. She had security, luxury, respect, everything she had thought she wanted, but she had traded her soul for it, and the price was becoming unbearable. "I want more," she thought, the words echoing in her mind like a prayer. "I want to be seen, to be touched, to be loved. I want to feel alive again." For the first time in 14 months, the thought didn't feel like a betrayal of her contract. It felt like a promise to herself. A promise that somehow, someway, she was going to find the courage to start living again, even if it meant walking away from everything she had thought she needed to survive. The charity gala at the Plaza Hotel was supposed to be their night, one of the few occasions where Damien actually needed her by his side, where she could pretend for a few hours that their marriage meant something more than tax benefits and social appearances. Savannah had spent the entire day preparing. She'd chosen the midnight blue Valentino gown carefully, had her hair styled in the elegant updo she knew photographed well, applied her makeup with the precision of a woman who understood that her only value lay in how perfectly she could play her role. When Damien emerged from his study in his black tuxedo, she felt her breath catch the way it always did. Even after 14 months of living with his indifference, he still had the power to make her heart race with nothing more than his presence. "You look beautiful," he said, his tone polite and distant, the same voice he used to compliment his secretary's efficient filing system. "Thank you," she replied, hoping he might elaborate, might look at her the way a husband should look at his wife. But he was already checking his watch, already mentally at the event, managing the evening like another business transaction. In the limousine, Savannah tried to bridge the glacier between them. "I read about the foundation we're supporting tonight. The children's literacy program seems wonderful." "Morrison handles the charitable donations," Damien replied without looking up from his phone. "I'm sure whatever they're doing is adequate." Adequate. The word stung. Everything in his world was either adequate or insufficient. There was no room for passion, for genuine care, for the messy emotions that made life worth living. "I was thinking," she continued, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. Maybe we could visit one of the schools they support, together. I'd love to read to the children. For a moment, he glanced up, and she saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, perhaps, that she had an opinion about anything beyond which dress to wear. But it was gone so quickly, she might have imagined it. That won't be necessary, he said, returning to his phone. We fulfill our obligations through financial contributions. The dismissal was swift, efficient, and devastating. Savannah felt something wither inside her chest, another small piece of her hope crumbling into dust. At the gala, they moved through the crowd like the perfect power couple, Damien commanding attention with his presence while Savannah smiled and made appropriate conversation with wives who envied her lifestyle and had no idea she would trade places with any of them in a heartbeat. "Mrs. Whitlock, you look absolutely radiant," gushed Patricia Hamilton, wife of a prominent judge. "Married life certainly agrees with you." "It's wonderful," Savannah replied automatically, the lie smooth as silk after months of practice. "Damien is very attentive." Attentive. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. He was attentive to his stock portfolio, to his board meetings, to the quarterly reports that covered his desk like a paper fortress, but attentive to her. She couldn't remember the last time he had asked about her day, her dreams, her feelings about anything more complex than dinner preferences. During the auction portion of the evening, Savannah watched other couples interact with a growing ache in her chest. She saw Senator Morrison whisper something in his wife's ear that made her laugh, her face lighting up with genuine joy. She watched tech mogul David Chen place his hand protectively on his wife's back when she nearly stumbled in her heels, his concern immediate and tender. These were couples who had chosen each other, who saw each other, who existed in each other's worlds as more than decorative accessories. When the auctioneer announced a week-long vacation to Tuscany, Savannah felt a wild surge of hope. She leaned closer to Damien, close enough to catch his cologne, close enough to pretend for a moment that they were intimate. "That sounds lovely," she whispered. "When was the last time we took a real vacation together?" The question was absurd, and they both knew it. They had never taken a vacation together. They had barely spent a full day in each other's company, outside of required social functions. I don't have time for vacations," he replied, his voice so low only she could hear. "You're welcome to bid on it yourself if you're interested. You're welcome to bid on it yourself," as if she were a stranger at the next table, not his wife. As if the idea of spending a week alone together was so foreign, it hadn't even occurred to him. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of polite conversation and practiced smiles. Savannah watched her husband work the room with the efficiency of a man who had turned networking into an art form, and she realized with crystal clarity that she was nothing more than a prop in his perfectly orchestrated performance. When they finally returned home, the silence in the elevator felt suffocating. 14 floors of opportunity to say something real, to acknowledge that they were two human beings sharing a life, and instead they stood like strangers who happened to be traveling to the same destination. "Thank you for tonight," Damien said as they reached their door, his tone suggesting she had provided a service rather than accompanied her husband to a social event. "Of course," she replied, though her throat felt tight with unshed tears. As he disappeared into his study, always his study, his sanctuary from the messy complications of human connection, Savannah stood alone in their beautiful, empty living room and felt something crack inside her chest. She had tried. God, how she had tried. For 14 months, she had attempted to be the perfect wife, to find ways to connect with him, to prove that she could be more than just a contractual obligation. She had learned his schedule, his preferences, his habits. She had made herself available for every social function, every business dinner, every moment when he needed her to play her role. But it was never enough, because he didn't want a wife. He wanted an employee who happened to share his last name, walking to her bedroom, her own bedroom, because even in their most intimate space they remained strangers. Savannah caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was elegantly dressed, perfectly groomed and utterly hollow. At 42, she was living a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt like death from within. She had everything money could buy and nothing her heart actually needed. I can't do this anymore, she thought, the admission hitting her like a physical blow. I can't spend the rest of my life being invisible to the one person who should see me most clearly. The thought terrified her, but it also felt like the first honest emotion she had allowed herself in months. She deserved more than this. She deserved to be seen, to be wanted, to be loved by someone who thought of her as more than a beautiful accessory to his successful life. She deserved to feel alive again, and for the first time since signing that contract, she began to wonder if the price of her security was actually her soul. The morning after the gala, Savannah woke with a headache that felt like her soul was trying to escape through her skull. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling of her lonely bedroom, replaying every cold interaction, every dismissive word, every moment when Damien had looked through her as if she were made of glass. She found him in the kitchen at 6 a.m., already dressed for another day of meetings that were more important than she would ever be. He stood at the marble island with his laptop open, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. The picture of a man who had never learned that mornings could be shared with someone else. "Good morning," she said softly, testing the waters one more time. He glanced up briefly, acknowledged her presence with a nod that could have been directed at a piece of furniture, and returned to his screen. No smile, no warmth, no recognition that the woman standing in their kitchen was his wife, not his housekeeper. Savannah felt something twist in her chest. Part desperation, part fury, part grief for the marriage she had foolishly hoped might one day become real. "I thought maybe we could have breakfast together," she said, moving to the coffee machine with forced casualness. "Before you leave for the office." "I don't eat breakfast," he replied without looking up. "Too much sugar disrupts cognitive function." "Too much sugar disrupts cognitive function, not I'm not hungry or I prefer to eat at the office." A clinical explanation that reduced human connection to a business efficiency problem. "Right," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And of course." She poured herself coffee with hands that trembled slightly, hating herself for the tremor, hating him for causing it, hating the entire situation that had reduced her to begging for crumbs of attention from her own husband. "I was thinking," she continued, because she was apparently a glutton for punishment. "Maybe this weekend we could do something together. Take a walk in Central Park, or visit that new art exhibit at MoMA, or I'll be working this weekend." He cut her off, still typing. "The Henderson acquisition requires immediate attention." "Every weekend." The word slipped out sharper than she intended. This time he did look up, his blue eyes cold and slightly annoyed, as if she had interrupted an important call rather than asked to spend time with her husband. "Yes, Savannah. Every weekend. Some of us have responsibilities that extend beyond social calendars and shopping appointments." The words hit her like a slap. Shopping appointments. As if that's all she was, a pampered housewife with nothing more important to do than spend his money on pretty things. As if she hadn't given up her own career, her own dreams, her own life to play this role he had assigned her. "Duh, I wasn't suggesting you abandon your responsibilities," she said, her voice tight with the effort of staying calm. "I was suggesting that maybe your wife could be one of them." The silence that followed was arctic. Damien closed his laptop with deliberate precision, gathered his things, and headed toward the door without another word. "Damien!" she called after him, desperation bleeding through her careful composure. He paused at the threshold, his back to her. "Do you even see me?" she asked, the question torn from somewhere deep in her chest. "Am I real to you, or am I just another item on your balance sheet?" For a moment, she thought he might turn around, thought he might say something, anything, that would acknowledge she was a human being with feelings and needs and a heart that was slowly dying from neglect. Instead, he said, "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the echo of his indifference and the bitter taste of her own foolishness. The day stretched ahead of her like a prison sentence. She tried to fill it with purpose, called her mother, went to the gym, met Nina for lunch, but everything felt hollow, like she was going through the motions of a life that belonged to someone else. "You look terrible," Nina said bluntly over Caesar salads at their usual spot. Before you tell me you're fine, remember that I've known you since college. You haven't been fine in months." "I'm tired," Savannah replied, which was true, but incomplete. She was tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Tired in her bones and her soul, and the deepest parts of herself that had forgotten what it felt like to be truly alive. "When's the last time you and Damien did something together that wasn't work-related?" Nina asked. The question hung in the air like an accusation. When was the last time? Had there ever been a first time? "We're both busy," Savannah said weakly. "Bullshit." Nina's voice was gentle but firm. "Couples make time for each other. They prioritize each other. They act like they actually want to be in the same room. It's complicated." "No, it's not." Nina reached across the table and took her hand. "Savannah, you're disappearing. I can see it happening, and it's breaking my heart. You used to light up rooms when you walked in. Now you look like a ghost haunting your own life." The words hit too close to home. Savannah felt tears prick at her eyes. The first real emotion she had allowed herself all day. "I tried," she whispered. "I've tried everything. I've been patient. I've been understanding. I've played the perfect wife. But he doesn't see me. He looks right through me like I don't exist." "Then maybe it's time to stop trying so hard," Nina said quietly. "Maybe it's time to remember that you deserve to be with someone who thinks you're the most important thing in their world." That evening, Savannah sat alone in their penthouse, watching the sun set over Central Park through windows that cost more than most people's houses. The space around her was perfect, every detail curated by designers who understood luxury but had never been asked to consider happiness. At 9 o'clock, she heard Damien's key in the lock. She had been sitting in the living room for hours, not because she was waiting for him, but because she literally had nowhere else to go. This was her life. Beautiful rooms, filled with expensive things, and absolutely no one who cared whether she was alive or dead. He passed through the living room without acknowledging her presence, heading straight for his study, his sanctuary, the place where he went to avoid dealing with the inconvenience of having a wife. "How was your day?" she called out, one last desperate attempt at connection. "Fine," he replied without stopping, without turning around, without giving her even the courtesy of eye contact. And that's when something inside Savannah finally broke. Not cracked or bent or strained, broke completely, like a dam that had been holding back an ocean of loneliness and pain and rage. She was 42 years old, and she was living like a prisoner in a golden cage. She had security, luxury, social status, everything she had thought she needed. But she didn't have the one thing that made any of it worthwhile. She didn't have love. More than that, she didn't have herself. Somewhere in the past 14 months, she had lost the woman she used to be, the woman who laughed easily, who dreamed big, who believed she deserved to be cherished. "I want more," she thought, the words echoing in her mind like a battle cry. "I want to be seen, to be touched, to be loved. I want to feel alive again." And for the first time since signing that contract, she began to seriously consider what it would take to get her life back, even if it meant losing everything else in the process. 3 days, 72 hours since the dam inside Savannah had burst, and she felt like she was seeing her life with terrifying clarity for the first time in over a year. She sat in the penthouse's pristine living room, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people's homes, and felt like a stranger in her own existence. Every surface gleamed with expensive perfection, every detail curated to project an image of success and sophistication. But it was all hollow, a beautiful shell wrapped around an empty life. The sound of Damien's voice drifted from his study, where he was conducting yet another conference call that was more important than acknowledging his wife's existence. His tone was animated, engaged, passionate, everything he never was when speaking to her. That's what passion sounds like, she thought bitterly. That's what it sounds like when he cares about something. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. In 14 months of marriage, she had never heard him speak with that kind of enthusiasm about anything that involved her. Business deals, stock acquisitions, market projections, those fired his blood, captured his attention, earned his respect. But his wife? She was background noise, easily ignored and quickly forgotten. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Haven't heard from you in a few days, sweetheart. Everything okay?" Savannah stared at the message, her throat tight with unshed tears. How could she explain that she was drowning in luxury, that she had everything money could buy and nothing her heart actually needed? That she was married to a man who treated her like an expensive accessory he occasionally had to dust off for public display? She typed back, "Everything's fine. Mom, just busy." Another lie. Her life had become a series of lies, each one easier to tell than the truth that would break her mother's heart. Because Dorothy Cole was so proud of her daughter's successful marriage, so relieved that the financial pressures were gone, so grateful to Damien for taking care of her girl. If only she knew that taking care of someone required actually seeing them as human. The conference call ended, and Damien emerged from his study, already reaching for his coat. It was barely noon, but she knew he wouldn't be back until late. Another dinner meeting, another networking event, another opportunity to invest his energy in anything except his marriage. "I'll be at the Harper Industries presentation until 8:00, he said, not looking at her as he gathered his things. "Then dinner with the Peterson group." "Of course you will," she replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. This time he did look at her, his eyebrows raised in mild surprise. "Excuse me." "Nothing," she said quickly, but something reckless had awakened inside her. "Just wondering when you might actually spend an evening at home with your wife?" "I'm building an empire, Savannah," he said, his tone suggesting she was too simple to understand such complexities. "That requires dedication and sacrifice. From both of us, apparently," she muttered. His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment Savannah teetered on the edge of finally telling him the truth, that she was suffocating in their perfect life, that she felt invisible, unwanted, like a ghost haunting spaces she was supposed to call home, that she would trade every designer dress in her closet for one genuine conversation, one real laugh, one moment when he looked at her like she mattered. Instead, she said, "Nothing, have a good day." The disappointment in his expression was subtle but unmistakable, not disappointment in her response, but in her lack of understanding about his priorities. He left without another word, and Savannah felt something inside her chest turn to stone. That afternoon, she found herself in places she hadn't visited in months: her old neighborhood in Brooklyn, the coffee shop where she used to write, the small bookstore where she had once harbored dreams of seeing her own novel on the shelves. Everything looked the same, but she felt like an alien visiting from another planet. "Savannah, oh my God, is that really you?" She turned to find Alex Thompson, an old friend from her writing group, staring at her with delighted surprise. He looked exactly the same: rumpled hair, paint-stained jeans, the kind of authentic messiness that her current life had scrubbed away completely. "Alex," she said, trying to summon genuine warmth, "how are you?" "Better question is how are you?" He gestured to her designer outfit, her perfectly styled hair, the overall transformation that screamed expensive. "Look at you, all fancy now. Married life treating you well." The question was innocent, friendly, but it felt like a knife to her chest. Married life. If only he knew that she had never felt less married in her life. "It's different," she said carefully. Different good or different complicated?" Alex had always been perceptive, and his eyes were studying her face with the intensity of someone who actually cared about the answer. "Just different," she repeated, but her voice cracked slightly on the words. They ended up at their old coffee shop, sitting in mismatched chairs at a wobbly table, and for the first time in over a year, Savannah felt like herself again. Alex talked about his art, his struggles, his small victories and crushing defeats, and she realized with a start that she had forgotten what it was like to have a conversation that mattered. "So what about you?" he asked finally, still writing. The question hit her like a slap. Writing. When was the last time she had written anything besides thank you notes for charity events and RSVPs for social functions she didn't care about? "No," she said quietly. "I don't really have time anymore." "That's a shame," Alex said, and she could tell he meant it. "You had something special. That story about the woman who forgot how to dream. God, that gave me chills." Savannah felt tears prick at her eyes. She had forgotten about that story, forgotten about the dreams she used to carry, forgotten about the woman who believed her words mattered. Maybe I'll start again," she said, but even as she spoke the words, she knew it was another lie. How could she write about dreams when she had stopped believing in them? How could she create stories about hope when she had forgotten what hope felt like? When she returned to the penthouse that evening, Damien was already gone. Another late meeting, another priority that ranked higher than coming home to his wife. She stood in their beautiful, empty living room and felt the walls closing in around her. At 42, she was living a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt like death from within. She had security, luxury, social status, everything she had thought she wanted, but she had lost herself completely in the process, becoming a beautiful, expensive ghost haunting someone else's life. "I can't do this anymore," she thought, the admission finally crystallizing into something real and urgent. "I can't spend the rest of my life disappearing a little more each day." She thought about Alex, about the genuine warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She thought about her old life, messy and complicated and real. She thought about the woman she used to be, flawed, struggling, but alive in ways that mattered. And for the first time since signing that contract, she began to seriously plan what it would take to get that woman back, even if it meant losing everything else in the process. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, disguised as something so ordinary that Savannah almost missed its significance. She woke to an empty bed in an empty room in an empty penthouse. The silence so complete it felt like living inside a tomb. Damien had left before dawn for another business trip, Chicago this time, or maybe Seattle. She had stopped keeping track of the cities that were more important than coming home to his wife. In the kitchen, she found a note written in his precise handwriting. "Back Thursday. Board meeting Friday requires your attendance. Morrison will brief you. Not miss you, or have a good week, or any of the 1,000 small intimacies that couples shared. Just logistics. Instructions." A reminder that her only value lay in her ability to smile prettily at his business associates and pretend their marriage was anything more than an elaborate tax shelter. Savannah crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, where it belonged with all the other remnants of her dignity. She was scheduled for lunch with the wives of Damien's business partners, another performance where she would discuss charity work and vacation homes while dying a little more inside. But as she stood in her walk-in closet, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of clothes that felt like costumes for a play she never auditioned for, something inside her rebelled. No. The word echoed in her mind with surprising force. No more lunches where she pretended to care about people who saw her as nothing more than Damien Whitlock's attractive accessory. No more smiling until her face hurt while discussing the renovation of Hampton houses she would never be invited to enjoy. No more playing the role of the perfect billionaire's wife when her husband couldn't even be bothered to kiss her goodbye. Instead, she put on jeans, actual jeans that she'd hidden in the back of her closet like contraband, and took the subway to Brooklyn, to her old life, to the places where Savannah Cole had existed before she became Mrs. Whitlock, and lost herself entirely. The apartment building where she used to live looked smaller than she remembered, but it was filled with something her current home lacked: life. Children played in the hallway, music drifted from open windows, neighbors called out greetings to each other. It was messy and chaotic and absolutely beautiful. She found herself at Nina's apartment, standing outside the door like a refugee from her own existence. "Udi Savannah." Nina opened the door in paint-splattered overalls, her hair tied back with what looked like a strip of fabric torn from an old shirt. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at some fancy luncheon?" "I couldn't do it," Savannah said, her voice breaking. "I couldn't sit through another meal, pretending my life isn't a beautiful lie." Nina took one look at her face and pulled her inside, wrapping her in the kind of fierce hug that Savannah hadn't experienced in over a year. She smelled like paint and coffee and life, and Savannah felt herself beginning to come apart at the seams. "Talk to me," Nina said, leading her to the couch that had seen better decades, but was infinitely more welcoming than any piece of furniture in the penthouse. And finally, Savannah told the truth. She told Nina about the mornings when Damien left without saying goodbye, about the evenings when he came home so late she was already asleep, then left again before she woke up, about the way he looked through her instead of at her, the way he spoke to her like she was his assistant rather than his wife, the way he had never once asked about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for their future together. "I'm disappearing," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm 42 years old, and I'm disappearing a little more every day. I don't laugh anymore. I don't dream anymore. I don't even remember what it feels like to be truly happy." "Then leave," Nina said simply. The words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "It's not that easy," Savannah protested. "The contract, the money, my mother's medical bills." "Your mother wouldn't want you to sacrifice your soul for her medical bills," Nina interrupted. "And you know it. She raised you to be strong, to fight for what you deserve." "This isn't what you deserve, Savannah." "But where would I go? What would I do? I haven't worked in over a year. I don't have anywhere to live. I don't even know who I am anymore without all of this." "You're the woman who used to write stories that made people cry," Nina said fiercely. "You're the woman who stood up to Marcus when he tried to control you, even though it cost you everything. You're the woman who has more strength in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. That woman is still in there. She's just been buried under designer clothes and empty dinner parties." Savannah closed her eyes, trying to find that woman Nina was talking about, somewhere beneath the careful composure and practiced smiles. She could feel her, angry, hurt, desperate to break free. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," Nina said. "Being scared means you're about to do something brave." That evening, Savannah returned to the penthouse with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She looked around their beautiful home, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the artwork that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and felt nothing but a cold emptiness. This wasn't her home. It was Damien's space that she happened to occupy, like an expensive pet that was fed and housed but never truly loved. In her bedroom, she pulled out the suitcase she hadn't used since their honeymoon, that never happened, and began to pack. Not everything. She didn't want everything. Just the things that belonged to the woman she used to be, her grandmother's jewelry, the few books Damien hadn't deemed clutter, the photos from her old life that she'd hidden away like shameful secrets. As she folded clothes, simple clothes, comfortable clothes, clothes that felt like her instead of costumes, she thought about what she would say to him when he returned. How do you tell someone that their indifference has slowly killed the person you used to be? How do you explain that love isn't just about financial security and social status, but about being seen, being valued, being cherished for who you are, rather than what you represent? But maybe she wouldn't say anything at all. Maybe she would just leave, the way he left every morning without looking back. Maybe silence was the only language he would understand. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Flight delayed. Won't be back until Friday." Even from hundreds of miles away, even when she was preparing to leave him forever, he couldn't be bothered to call. Just a text, brief and impersonal, treating her like a business contact rather than the woman who had shared his name for over a year. Savannah looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. By Friday morning, she would be gone. Not to punish him, he probably wouldn't even notice her absence until Morrison reminded him he needed a wife for the board meeting. But to save herself, to find the woman she used to be before she traded her soul for security. She was 42 years old, and she was finally ready to start living again, even if it meant losing everything else in the process. Thursday evening arrived like a countdown to freedom, each passing hour bringing Savannah closer to the moment she would finally reclaim her life. The penthouse felt different now that she had made her decision, less like a prison and more like a beautiful museum she was preparing to leave forever. She had spent the day making arrangements with the quiet efficiency of someone planning a military operation, a small apartment in Queens, nothing fancy but hers. Her old job at the literary magazine wouldn't take her back, but the editor had mentioned freelance opportunities. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. Most importantly, she had called her mother. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Dorothy's voice had been immediately concerned. "You sound different." "I'm leaving Damien, Mom." The silence that followed was so complete that Savannah wondered if the call had dropped. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "What happened? Did he hurt you?" "Not the way you mean," Savannah had replied, tears threatening. "But yes, he hurt me. Every day, he hurt me by treating me like I don't exist." The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of her life. Her mother's disappointment was palpable, not in Savannah's decision, but in her own failure to see what was happening to her daughter. "I was so grateful to him," Dorothy had whispered, "so relieved that you were taken care of. I never thought to ask if you were happy." "It's not your fault, Mum. I chose this. But now I'm choosing something else. What about the medical bills, the house?" "We'll figure it out," Savannah had said, and meant it. "We always did before. We'll find a way." Now, as Thursday night settled over Manhattan like a heavy blanket, Savannah stood in the bedroom that had never felt like hers, surrounded by the remnants of a life she was about to abandon. 2 suitcases sat by the door, everything she needed to start over packed into 2 pieces of luggage. She had left her wedding ring on the dresser, next to a letter she had written and rewritten a dozen times. The final version was simple, honest, and heartbreaking. "Damien, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not because I want to hurt you, but because staying is killing me. For 14 months, I've tried to be the wife you needed. I've played my role perfectly, smiled at your colleagues, attended your events, and asked for nothing more than the occasional acknowledgement that I exist. But I can't live as a ghost in my own life anymore. I know you don't love me. You've made that clear in 1,000 different ways, but I've realized that I can't love myself while living this lie. I deserve more than a marriage contract. I deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved by someone who chooses me every day, not just when it's convenient for business. The money you've provided will help my mother for now, and I'll find a way to pay you back eventually. But I can't accept it anymore, knowing the price is my soul. I hope someday you find whatever it is you're really looking for. And I hope you understand why I had to leave to find myself." Savannah. She had considered adding more, explaining how his indifference had slowly eroded her sense of self, how many nights she had lain awake, wondering if she would simply fade away entirely. But what was the point? He had never been interested in her feelings when she was there. He certainly wouldn't care about them after she was gone. The apartment felt eerily quiet as she made her final preparations. No music from Damien's study, no sound of his voice on conference calls, no reminder that she shared this space with another human being who had somehow perfected the art of making her feel completely alone. At midnight, she called a car. Not one of Damien's drivers. She couldn't risk anyone reporting back to him before she was safely away. A regular taxi that would take her to her new life, humble and uncertain as it might be. As she waited for the car to arrive, Savannah walked through the penthouse one last time. Each room was a monument to wealth and taste, but they felt cold and lifeless, like beautiful photographs of places she had visited but never actually lived. In the living room, she paused at the window where she had spent so many mornings watching other people's lives unfold below. The city sparkled in the darkness. Millions of lights representing millions of people who were probably sleeping peacefully beside partners, who knew their dreams, their fears, their favorite songs. I want that, she thought. I want someone who sees me, really sees me. Someone who asks about my day because they genuinely care about the answer. Someone who holds my hand not for appearances, but because they can't help themselves. Her phone buzzed. Car is here. Savannah picked up her suitcases, took one last look around the beautiful, empty home she was leaving behind, and walked toward the door. Her hands shook as she turned the handle, but it wasn't fear causing the tremor. It was anticipation. For the first time in over a year, she was making a choice based on what she wanted, not what was expected of her. For the first time since signing that contract, she was choosing herself. The elevator ride down felt like descending from a tower where she had been held captive. Each floor brought her closer to ground level, closer to real life, closer to the possibility of finding herself again. The lobby was empty except for the night doorman, who nodded politely as she passed. He had probably seen dozens of wealthy wives leaving in the middle of the night, though usually they were running to lovers rather than running from loveless marriages. The taxi driver helped her load her suitcases into the trunk, and as they pulled away from the building that had been her prison for 14 months, Savannah didn't look back. She was 42 years old, and she was finally free. The apartment in Queens was small, sparsely furnished, and absolutely perfect. It smelled like fresh paint and possibility, like the beginning of a story she would write herself, rather than having it dictated by someone else's needs. She unpacked slowly, savoring each small decision: where to put her grandmother's jewelry, which corner would hold the small desk where she might start writing again, how the morning light would fall across the bed that would be hers alone. As dawn broke over New York City, Savannah Cole, no longer Mrs. Whitlock, sat at her tiny kitchen table with a cup of coffee and felt something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. She had lost everything she thought she needed and gained back everything that actually mattered: her dignity, her autonomy, her sense of self. Tomorrow, Damien would return to an empty penthouse and discover that his wife had vanished like morning mist. But by then, she would already be rebuilding her life, one brave choice at a time. For the first time in over a year, she was exactly where she belonged. Friday afternoon brought Damien Whitlock home to a silence that felt different from the usual quiet of his perfectly ordered life. He stood in the foyer of his penthouse, briefcase in hand, and felt something shift in the atmosphere, a subtle wrongness that he couldn't immediately identify. "Savannah!" he called out, his voice echoing off the marble floors. No response, but that wasn't unusual. She often spent afternoons shopping or at lunch with the wives of his business associates, part of the routine that kept their arrangement functioning smoothly. He headed to his study, already mentally organizing the contracts that needed his attention, the calls that required his immediate response. The Peterson acquisition had closed successfully in Chicago, adding another $40 million to his portfolio. It should have felt like a victory, but instead, he felt strangely hollow, like winning a game that had lost its meaning. It was only when he went to his bedroom to change clothes for the evening board meeting that he noticed the ring. Savannah's wedding ring sat on his dresser like an accusation, the diamonds catching the afternoon light and throwing tiny rainbows across the dark wood. Beside it, folded with the kind of precision she brought to everything in her role as his wife, was a letter with his name written in her careful handwriting. For a moment, Damien stared at the scene without comprehension. The ring belonged on her finger. The letter belonged nowhere. In 14 months of marriage, Savannah had never left him so much as a grocery list, let alone formal correspondence. He picked up the letter with fingers that trembled slightly, the first uncontrolled reaction he had allowed himself in years. "Damien, by the time you read this, I'll be gone." The words hit him like physical blows. each sentence stripping away another layer of the carefully constructed reality he had built around their arrangement. She was gone, not shopping, not at lunch, not playing the role he had assigned her. Gone. I can't live as a ghost in my own life anymore. Ghost! The word stopped him cold. Was that how she saw herself? How he had made her feel? He thought back to their interactions over the past weeks, months, and felt something twist in his chest. When was the last time he had really looked at her, really seen her as more than a beautiful accessory to his successful life? I deserve more than a marriage contract. I deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved by someone who chooses me every day. Loved. The word felt foreign in his mind, dangerous in a way that made his chest tighten with something he refused to name. He had structured their entire arrangement specifically to avoid love, to prevent the kind of devastating loss that had nearly destroyed him 5 years ago. But reading her words, he realized with crushing clarity that in protecting himself from pain, he had inflicted it on someone else, someone who deserved better. Damien sank into the chair beside his dresser, the letter shaking in his hands as he read it again and again. Each reading revealed new layers of hurt he had been too self-absorbed to notice, too afraid to acknowledge. For 14 months, I've tried to be the wife you needed. Had she tried, he forced himself to remember, to really examine their interactions instead of simply categorizing them as complete and moving on to the next item on his agenda. The way she had always been ready for social events, never complaining about the late notice or his complete lack of input on their shared calendar. The way she had learned his preferences without being asked, ensuring his coffee was exactly the right temperature, his dry cleaning picked up on schedule, his life running with clockwork precision. The way she had sometimes looked at him with something that might have been hope, before learning to school her expression into the same polite neutrality he wore like armor. When was the last time he had asked about her day, her dreams, her feelings about anything more complex than dinner preferences? When was the last time he had treated her like a partner instead of an employee? When was the last time he had kissed her, touched her, made her feel like a woman instead of a beautiful statue in his collection? The answer hit him like a sledgehammer. Never. In 14 months of marriage, he had never once kissed his wife, had never held her hand except for photographs, had never told her she was beautiful and meant it as more than a professional assessment of her appearance. He had given her financial security and social status, and she had given him her youth, her dreams, her self-respect. The trade had been catastrophically unequal, and he had been too focused on protecting his own heart to notice he was systematically breaking hers. His phone buzzed with a text from Morrison, board meeting in 2 hours. Mrs. Whitlock's attendance required, as if she were a resource to be deployed, not a person with her own will and agency, as if 14 months of treating her like a beautiful object had earned him the right to her permanent availability. But she was gone, and for the first time since Anna and Lily died, Damien felt the full weight of loss pressing down on his chest like a physical force. He found himself walking through the penthouse, seeing it through new eyes. Every room was perfect, expensively furnished, completely devoid of life. There were no personal touches, no signs that a woman had lived here for over a year. He had created a museum of his own success, not a home. In what had been Savannah's room, God, even their sleeping arrangements had been a monument to his emotional cowardice. He found evidence of her hasty departure. Hangers pushed to one side, drawers slightly open, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. She had taken almost nothing. The designer clothes he had bought her still hung in the closet like empty promises. The jewelry he had given her, not gifts, he realized now, but accessories for the role she played, remained in their velvet boxes, untouched. She had left behind everything that money could buy and taken, only what belonged to the woman she had been before he systematically erased her. Damien called Morrison, his voice strange and hollow, even to his own ears. Cancel the board meeting. "Sir, the Peterson acquisition." "Cancel it," he repeated, then hung up. For the first time in 5 years, business didn't matter. Profit margins and market projections felt like children's games compared to the devastating realization that he had lost something infinitely more valuable than money. He had lost Savannah, not the perfect wife who smiled on command and played her role without complaint, but the real woman underneath, the one who had tried for 14 months to build something meaningful with a man too afraid to let her succeed. The woman who had finally found the courage to save herself from a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit. Standing alone in his perfect, empty penthouse, surrounded by all the material success that had once felt so important, Damien understood with brutal clarity that he had won everything and lost the only thing that mattered. And for the first time since Anna and Lily died, he felt something crack in the ice around his heart. The realization that Savannah was truly gone hit Damien like a physical force, driving him to his knees in the middle of his pristine living room. For 5 years, he had perfected the art of emotional numbness, but her absence tore through his defenses like they were made of paper. He called her phone, straight to voicemail. The sound of her voice asking him to leave a message was torture, a reminder of all the times he had heard that voice and dismissed it as background noise. "Savannah," he said after the beep, his voice cracking, "please call me back, we need to talk." But even as he said the words, he knew she wouldn't call. Why would she? He had spent 14 months proving that her voice, her thoughts, her very existence meant nothing to him. Morrison arrived within the hour, summoned by Damien's frantic call. The older man took one look at his employer, disheveled, desperate, clutching Savannah's letter like a lifeline, and understood immediately. "She left," Morrison said quietly. "Find her," Damien commanded, his voice raw. "I don't care what it costs. Hire private investigators, check every hotel in the city, call every contact we have, find my wife." "Sir," Morrison said carefully, "perhaps you should consider that Mrs. Whitlock made this choice for a reason. Maybe she needs time. She needs me to prove that I'm not the monster she thinks I am," Damien interrupted, his hands shaking as he paced the room. "She needs me to show her that I can change, that I can be the husband she deserves." Morrison was quiet for a moment, studying the man he had worked with for over a decade. "What exactly are you planning to do when we find her?" The question stopped Damien cold. What was he planning to do? Storm into wherever she was hiding and demand she come home, offer her more money, better terms, a revised contract that would make their arrangement more palatable? No. For the first time in 5 years, money felt meaningless. Contracts felt like prisons. The business empire he had built felt like ash in his mouth. "I'm going to apologize," he said finally. "I'm going to tell her the truth about why I built these walls, and I'm going to ask her to give me a chance to tear them down. And if she says no," Damien felt something break inside his chest, "then I'll have lost the only thing that ever really mattered." The search began immediately. Morrison mobilized a team of investigators with the efficiency of a military operation, but every lead turned cold. Savannah had disappeared as thoroughly as if she had never existed, leaving behind only the ghost of her presence and the devastating clarity of her absence. Hours turned into days. Damien stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped pretending that anything in his life mattered beyond finding the woman he had driven away. He haunted the penthouse like a man possessed, seeing her everywhere, in the kitchen where she had tried so many times to make conversation, in the living room where she had sat alone while he worked, in the bedroom that had never truly been theirs. On Tuesday morning, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. "I found something," Morrison said, entering Damien's study where he had been staring at the same contract for 3 hours, without reading a single word. "A dear friend of hers, Nina Patterson. She might know where Mrs. Whitlock is staying." Damien was in his car within minutes, driving through Brooklyn with a desperation that made him realize how empty his life had been without her. Nina Patterson lived in a small apartment building that represented everything his penthouse wasn't: alive, messy, real. Nina answered the door with suspicion that quickly turned to contempt when she saw who was standing in her hallway. "Well, well," she said, blocking the doorway with her body, "if it isn't the husband of the year." "I need to find Savannah," Damien said without preamble. "Please, I know I don't deserve your help, but—" "You're right," Nina interrupted. "You don't deserve it. You don't deserve her either. But somehow she spent 14 months trying to make you see that she was worth loving." The words hit him like physical blows. "And I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Nina's voice rose. "You didn't make mistakes. You systematically destroyed a beautiful woman's sense of self-worth. You turned her into a ghost in her own life." "Please," Damien said, the word torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I know what I did. I know I hurt her, but I love her, and I need to tell her that." Nina studied his face for a long moment, searching for something she apparently didn't find. "You love her? After 14 months of treating her like expensive furniture, now you love her?" "I've always loved her," he admitted, the words feeling like a confession that could save his soul or damn it. "I was just too afraid to admit it, too afraid to lose someone else. But I've already lost her, haven't I? I lost her the moment I stopped seeing her as a person and started seeing her as a contract." Something shifted in Nina's expression. "And now she's leaving town," she said finally. "Tonight, the 8:15 train to Philadelphia. She's going to stay with her cousin until she figures out what comes next." Relief flooded through Damien like a physical force. "Thank you," he said, already turning to leave. "Mr. Whitlock," Nina called after him. "If you hurt her again, if you make her feel invisible again, I will personally make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Damien looked back at this woman who loved Savannah enough to protect her from him. "If I hurt her again," he said quietly, "I'll deserve whatever you do to me." The train station was a chaos of people and announcements and the constant motion of lives intersecting for brief moments before diverging again. Damien pushed through the crowds with single-minded determination, his heart pounding with the fear that he was already too late. He found her at platform 7, standing alone with 2 small suitcases, looking beautiful and heartbroken and completely lost. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that belonged to the woman she had been before he tried to reshape her into his idea of perfection. For a moment, he simply stood there, memorizing her face, understanding with brutal clarity what he had almost lost forever. Then she saw him. Their eyes met across the crowded platform, and Damien saw surprise, hurt, and something that might have been hope flicker across her features before she schooled them into the neutral expression she had learned to wear around him. She was leaving. In 15 minutes, she would be gone forever, and he would spend the rest of his life knowing that he had held love in his hands and been too afraid to recognize it. But he was here now, and for the first time in 5 years, Damien Whitlock was ready to fight for something more important than money. He was ready to fight for love. Time moved like honey in the seconds after their eyes met across platform 7. Savannah stood frozen beside her suitcases, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched Damien push through the crowd toward her. He looked terrible, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face etched with a desperation she had never seen before. "Savannah," he said when he reached her, her name a prayer on his lips. "Don't," she whispered, taking a step back. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain," she said, her voice stronger now, fortified by weeks of finding herself again. "I lived it, Damien. 14 months of being invisible to you, of trying to be enough for someone who could never see me as more than a beautiful accessory." The 8:15 to Philadelphia was announced over the loudspeaker, and passengers began moving toward the train. Savannah reached for her suitcases, but Damien's hand shot out to stop her. "Please," he said, his voice cracking, "just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes to tell you what I should have said every single day for the past 14 months. She wanted to walk away. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was exactly the kind of last-minute dramatics that would pull her back into a life that had slowly killed her spirit. But something in his eyes, something raw and broken and absolutely terrified, made her pause. "You have until the train leaves," she said quietly. Damien closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage from somewhere deep inside himself. When he opened them again, she saw past all his walls for the first time. "I was married before," he began, his voice barely audible above the station noise. "Anna, we were together for 8 years, married for 5. She was everything, my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. And we had a daughter, Lily. She was 3 years old, with Anna's laugh and my stubborn streak." Savannah felt her breath catch. In all their time together, he had never mentioned them. "They died in a car accident 5 years ago," he continued, tears starting to track down his cheeks. "A drunk driver ran a red light while Anna was taking Lily to dance class. I lost them both in an instant, and it nearly destroyed me." The announcement for final boarding echoed across the platform. Other passengers hurried past them, but Savannah couldn't move. "I promised myself I would never love like that again," Damien said, his voice breaking. "Never give someone the power to devastate me the way losing them did. So when I needed a wife for business purposes, I designed the perfect arrangement, all the benefits of marriage with none of the emotional risk. But you felt nothing for me," Savannah said, her own tears starting to fall. "For 14 months, you made me feel like I didn't exist." "No," he said fiercely, stepping closer. "That's the lie I told myself. The truth is that I felt everything for you, from the very beginning. The way you tried to make conversation over breakfast, the way you lit up when you talked about books, the way you looked at me like you could see past all the walls I'd built." "Damien, I was terrified," he interrupted. "Terrified that if I let myself love you, I'd lose you too. So I kept you at a distance, told myself you were just part of a business arrangement. But you weren't, Savannah. You were never just a contract. You were the woman who made me remember what it felt like to be alive." The conductor's final call echoed across the platform. Savannah looked toward the train, then back at Damien, her heart tearing in 2 directions. "It's too late," she whispered. "You can't undo 14 months of making me feel worthless with one conversation." "You're right," he said, moving closer still. "I can't undo the past, but I can promise you a different future. I can promise to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that you're the most important thing in my world." "How do I know you won't change your mind?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How do I know that tomorrow you won't go back to treating me like I'm invisible?" "Because," he said, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness, "I can't live without you. These past few days without you have been hell. My penthouse feels like a mausoleum. My life feels meaningless. And I finally understand that all the money in the world is worthless if I don't have someone to share it with." "The train is leaving," she said weakly, even as she leaned into his touch. "Then let it leave," he said, his forehead touching hers. "Don't get on that train, Savannah. Don't leave me to spend the rest of my life knowing I lost the only woman I'll ever love because I was too afraid to fight for her." "I can't go back to the way things were," she whispered. "Neither can I," he said. "I want to start over. No contracts, no rules, no walls between us. Just a man who loves a woman and wants to spend his life proving it to her." The train began to move, slowly pulling away from the platform. Savannah watched it go, watched her escape disappear into the distance, and felt something shift inside her chest. "I love you," Damien said, the words he had never spoken finally freed. "I love your laugh, your strength, your stubborn refusal to give up on us even when I gave you every reason to. I love the way you make coffee in the morning and the way you look when you're reading. I love everything about you, and I'm sorry it took losing you to make me brave enough to say it." Time stopped. The noise of the station faded away. 14 months of hurt and loneliness and desperate hope crystallized into this single moment of choice. And then Savannah rose on her toes and kissed him. It was the kiss that had been forbidden by their contract, forbidden by his walls, forbidden by every rule they had built around their arrangement. But it was also the kiss that shattered every barrier between them, that declared their marriage real for the first time. Damien kissed her back with 14 months of suppressed emotion, with 5 years of grief finally giving way to hope, with the desperate relief of a man who had almost lost everything and found it again in the arms of the woman he loved. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying, both of them transformed. "Take me home," Savannah whispered against his lips. "Where's home?" he asked. "Wherever you are," she said, "as long as you promise to see me, really see me, every single day." "I promise," he said, kissing her again. "I promise to love you the way you deserve to be loved, forever." The forbidden kiss had become their redemption, their new beginning, their declaration that some things were worth fighting for. And for the first time in their marriage, they were truly, completely, perfectly together. 6 months later, Savannah woke to the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. Real laughter, the kind that bubbled up from a place of genuine joy, rather than polite social obligation. She stretched luxuriously in their bed now, not his room and her room, but the space they had created together, and smiled at the familiar sounds of Damien attempting to make breakfast. The penthouse looked completely different now, gone with a sterile perfection and museum-like displays of wealth. In their place were mismatched throw pillows that Savannah had chosen, plants that somehow survived despite their complete lack of gardening skills, and photographs that captured real moments rather than staged perfection. The most prominent photo sat on the mantel, the two of them on their second wedding day, the one that had actually mattered. They had married again 3 months after the train station, in a small ceremony in Central Park, with only their closest friends and Savannah's mother in attendance. Dorothy Cole had cried through the entire service, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming joy of watching her daughter marry a man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitlock," Damien said as she padded into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around her from behind and nuzzling her neck. "How did you sleep?" "Like someone who knows she's loved," she replied, leaning back against his chest and marveling, as she did every morning, at how different his touch felt now. Where once there had been careful distance, now there was warmth, tenderness, the casual intimacy of two people who had chosen each other completely. "Ah, excellent answer," he murmured against her hair. "Because you are loved, I mean completely, utterly, embarrassingly loved." She turned in his arms to find him grinning at her with the kind of unguarded happiness that had taken months to surface. The transformation in Damien had been remarkable to witness. Walls coming down day by day, smile by smile, until the cold, distant CEO had given way to the man he had always been underneath. Funny, passionate, surprisingly romantic, and absolutely devoted to the woman he had almost lost. "What's the occasion?" she asked, gesturing to the elaborate breakfast spread on the counter. "It's not our anniversary, my birthday, or any holiday I can think of. Can't a man make his wife pancakes just because it's Tuesday?" he asked, but she could see something nervous flickering behind his eyes. "Damien Whitlock doesn't do anything, just because," she said, studying his face. "You're up to something." He laughed, the sound rich and warm and completely free. "God, I love that you know me so well. Fine, you caught me. I do have an ulterior motive." From his pocket, he pulled out an envelope with her name written in his now familiar handwriting. But this wasn't the careful, controlled script from their contract days. This was looser, more personal, written by a man who no longer needed to hide behind perfection. "What's this?" she asked, taking the envelope with curious fingers. "Read it," he said, his nervousness giving way to excitement. "But sit down first." Savannah perched on one of their mismatched kitchen stools and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, but what was written there made her gasp. Whitlock Foundation for Children's Literacy Executive Director, Savannah Cole Whitlock. Starting date, whenever you're ready, Damien, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. What is this? Remember that conversation we never had about the literacy program, he said, his hands gentle on her shoulders. The one where you wanted to read to children, and I dismissed it as unnecessary. Well, I've been thinking about it for months, about how passionate you sounded, how your whole face lit up when you talked about it. She looked up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. You created a foundation. We created a foundation, he corrected. I may have handled the legal paperwork, but this is your vision, your passion project. You'll have complete autonomy, unlimited funding, and a husband who will support every single dream you want to chase. Savannah felt tears streaming down her face as she read the details. It was everything she had dreamed of and never dared to hope for, a chance to make a real difference, to use her love of books and stories to help children who needed it most. There's more, Damien said softly. I've been talking to publishers about your writing. Remember those stories you used to write, the ones you thought no one would ever want to read? Well, you're wrong. Harper & Associates wants to publish a collection of your short stories, and they're offering an advance that would make even me proud. How did you... Nina may have mentioned that you've been writing again, he said with a sheepish grin, and I may have asked to read some of your work. And I may have immediately called everyone I know in publishing, because my wife is brilliant and the world deserves to know it. She launched herself into his arms, kissing him with all the love and gratitude and overwhelming joy that words couldn't contain. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying and holding each other like they never wanted to let go. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Good, he said, spinning her around their sun-filled kitchen. Be scared, be excited, be everything you want to be, and know that I'll be right here cheering you on. Later that evening they sat on their couch, the one they had picked out together, arguing good-naturedly about colors and fabrics like a real couple, reading different books with their feet tangled together. It was ordinary in the best possible way, domestic and peaceful and absolutely perfect. Damien, Savannah said, looking up from her novel. He replied, not taking his eyes off the biography he was reading. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, she said, simply. For choosing to fight for us, for becoming the man I always hoped you could be. He set down his book and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Thank you for being brave enough to leave, he said, for refusing to settle for less than you deserved, for teaching me that love isn't something to be afraid of, it's something to be celebrated. Outside their windows, New York City sparkled in the darkness, millions of lights representing millions of people living their own love stories. But inside their home, their real home, built on honesty and vulnerability and the kind of love that chose to grow rather than simply survive, Savannah and Damien had found something that no amount of money could buy. They had found each other. Not the perfect versions they had tried to be, but the real, flawed, beautifully human people they actually were. And for the first time since they had signed that contract over a year ago, they were truly, completely, perfectly happy. At 42 and 44, they were just beginning their real love story, and it was going to be magnificent. The end. What would you do in Savannah's place? After 14 months of living like a ghost in her own marriage, being treated like an expensive doll by her billionaire husband who never showed true love, would you have the courage to leave all the luxury and financial security to search for real love? Or would you stay in the golden prison waiting for crumbs of attention? Tell us your opinion. Was Savannah brave or reckless to abandon everything for dignity and self-love? And did Damien deserve a second chance after so long treating her poorly? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.